Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Taylor, and in today's video, we're finally going to be putting the drivetrain in the 70L Camino. So let's get started right now. So as you can see here, I've got the engine completely finished. I went ahead and threw the headers on just to clearance things for the oil sending unit and things like that, but this thing is ready to go. All the valves are lashed. It's got 5 quarts of oil in it, and basically all we're going to have to do today is bolt on the engine mounts, pull these headers back off, and then throw it in the car. First thing we're going to be doing is putting the transmission in. I'm borrowing this jack from a friend up at the old recycling yard up there. So now I'll show you what I've done to the El Camino over the past month since I've made a video on the car. Things are kind of a mess in here right now, but hopefully you can see. I'll get the light on for you. I have repainted everything in here. I actually redid this whole inner fender. There was some rub marks from the heater hoses. I went ahead and painted the bottom of the radiator support, all of the frame back down to basically where the transmission ends on both sides. Obviously this cross member here, so everything is nice and repainted. I will do some washing and things like that once the engine is in. There's a lot of dust and paint overspray from this project over the past month or so. But now let's get the car up in the air and I'll show you underneath and the things we'll be tackling first today. Underneath the car, I painted the bottom side of the radiator support along with the frame, sway bar, and even underneath the cross member. I went ahead and left the outer lower control arms alone. And then back in here, I got the frame and the front half of the pans very nice and clean and painted all of them. And then I kind of lost my motivation further back here, as you can tell. There's a line of where I just literally gave up because it was such a messy job. But first things first, we're going to put the transmission in because I don't think I'm going to have enough clearance to put the transmission in once the engine is in. As you can imagine, the engine's going to sit about here, and without tampering with the exhaust and likely cutting that apart, I don't think I'll be able to get it in. So we'll throw that in first. Well, I can already see our first issue of today's video. This hoist, or this stand, is so tall that this transmission is not actually going to fit under the lift. So I guess I'm going to have to catch up with you when I figure out how to get this underneath the car so we can get started with today's work. Well, I got the transmission under the car, and this jack is actually pretty cool. It has a little tilt option in the back here, so I tied down the torque converter so it wouldn't fall out of the front and basically tilted this thing down and got it under that rear cross member of the lift. So I guess that was probably the hardest part of what all this is going to be. Right now, I just got to jack it up into the transmission tunnel, and then I'm going to throw the cross member back in here. I did get a new Energy Suspensions mount for this thing off the back here. Got our bolt yoke in, and yeah, so now we're going to just go ahead and grab that cross member, kind of mock it up where I think it might need to go, and then we'll go ahead and secure this thing in there so we can put it back down on the ground. All right, guys, let's wheel this thing right in here. Man, this transmission's heavy. This thing weighs like 250 pounds supposedly. So now I'm going to go up with it. Let's see here. Now, since this is a 4L80E with that overdrive, it's much longer than the TH350 that was in here before, so the cross member is likely going to have to sit back a ways further, but we're just going to have to cross that bridge when we come to it and figure out where that needs to be. Alright guys, so you can see the transmission is in there. I don't know if it's really supposed to be there. Let's see. I think we might have to come back just a little ways. You can see the tail shaft here. But we're kind of running into a couple clearance issues with some of the existing cooling lines. You can see there, these are the factory lines, and I like I said, in several videos ago, I think this may have been in a box truck or something, and these lines jut out way too far, so I'm going to try to bend those real quick, and with any luck I can create some more clearance to get this thing up into the car just a little bit more, and then I think we'll be able to go ahead and throw the cross member in. We'll jack the back of it up, get that cross member in, and it should land somewhere over here, and we'll be on to the next step. Alright guys, so I've taken some crude measurements, and basically I was going from that motor mount post there to the bell housing, and just roughly from the engine to the mating surface of the back of the block to the bell housing, I measured about 16 inches, so I'm going to make sure I can get this thing to the back of the car about 16.5 inches from there. One thing I had to do to accomplish that was actually remove these cooling lines. So you can see I already screwed up my brand new paint job under here, but that's how it goes, right? So I had to pull those out. We're gonna be addressing and plumbing the cooling system for this thing down the road. So I pulled them out just for the sake of mounting this in. I may have to pull these flanges out and, or these, I don't know what these are. There's like a little clip that pops in. I may have to make my own cooling system for this. I was planning on using those and then just putting a rubber hose over them and with some hose clamps, but we'll tackle that at a different time. And then I did pull off this big bracket here. This was hitting pretty substantially, so this is not something I need. I don't even know what it goes to, honestly. So as you can see here now, we've got a lot of room there and pretty decent amount of room there. So now we can go ahead and move forward, jack this thing up, and then hopefully get that cross member in on the backside. So looking at the engine, I put one of the motor mounts on and measuring from the inside edge, because in the car on the cross member, I'm measuring from the front of the part that actually fits inside of here. So measuring from here to the back of the block where it meets the bell housing, I've got 17 inches exactly. And over here in the car, I have, let's see, 16.5 inches from the front side of this to the bell housing where it sits. So I need just a ½ inch more to go back in the car. Now, additionally, I also have an issue with height back here. Let me see if I can show you. So, let's see. Looking in here, you can see that that yoke is getting very close. And then if you look way back up there, let's see. If you look way back up in there, you can see that the transmission is probably like 1/4 inch or less away from hitting the pan. And I put this in gear and this actually will turn just fine. But I think with a transmission, the yoke bolts on there and there, it may get a little closer. So I might have to do something with this mount to get it to go a little bit lower, but we're very close. And I think what I'm gonna do to get the transmission back towards the rear of the car, so I'm gonna come up here, and hopefully you can see this, but this cross member is squared off back here and it's hitting an edge right before this raised part of the frame. I'm gonna take the cross member back out and I'm gonna nick a whole edge off the side of this thing, and that's going to allow us to slide it back basically this ½ inch right here, which should give us enough clearance to get the engine into the car with the transmission in. So with all that said, I've got some more work to do for sure before we can actually drop this thing in, but that's the part we're all really waiting for. Transmission stuff is not so fun, but at least we're not off by like a mile. You know, we're just a ½ inch here, maybe a ½ inch there. So I'm gonna make a couple of tweaks, and then when I catch back up with you guys, this transmission should be fitted in here roughly where it needs to be, and then we'll go ahead and drop that engine in. Well, it's the next day now. It's actually the night of Easter Sunday, and I'm celebrating the resurrection of the El Camino. But anyways, I've resorted to violence to get this transmission to fit. The first thing I did was I notched this cross member like I talked about in the last clip there, so I can slide it back on the frame rails. And then underneath the car, I've gotten quite a bit done. I had to clearance a few things on the transmission. There's this little ear here that stuck off of the tail shaft housing. I ground that down. You can see it stuck out square like this before. And then I was still having issues with these top 2 bolts actually hitting the body. So I'll show you that in a second. I did have to, get a little extra material there. I had to buzz down these 2 little mounting brackets. They had a couple of pieces of metal that stuck up with clips for a wire loom, which I won't be using, obviously. This is not in a box truck anymore. So anyways, I buzzed those 2 things off, and then I had this big thing sticking out here, and I didn't want to grind that on the transmission. So I resorted to violence under here, and basically just been going wild under here with a hammer for the past hour and a half. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but I clearanced all this in here for this big bump sticking out. I actually pounded out this entire ridge right here. There used to be a little boxed little part of the pan that came down. I pushed all that back up to clearance this whole area right here so I could get the transmission back into the car more. And then I had to clearance this right here for this little plug. This was hitting on the side. And then lastly, you can see the witness marks on the transmission. that was hitting right in here, and I just massaged that a little bit to get it to fit slightly better. So now this thing goes all the way back. I've got 17 inches from the mount to the face of the transmission, which is exactly where I need it to be to fit the engine in here. Well, I finally have the transmission in. I've really been thrashing to get this done because I have to return that transmission jack to my friends up at the junkyard before they start business on Monday, because they're always using it and I use it over the weekend. But here's what we've got. As you can see the pan sticking down there with our mount there in the back on the transmission cross member. And honestly, right now, this is a little ghetto looking. I just have 2 ratchet straps going across to support the front of the transmission till we get the engine mated up. But this is kind of its final resting place here. It's probably still up a little too high, so it's kind of hitting up top. But as you can tell, everything's bolted in. I did have a little bit of difficulty drilling new holes to line up, since we were farther back than all of these factory transmission mounting options. So I've got to finish that up a little bit later. I'm going to put grade 8 hardware in this, you know, once everything's buttoned up. But got our energy suspension mount in, all snugged up and pushed all the way back. Yeah, it's all pretty much come together tonight here. Then out back, you can see up here, we've got a lot of clearance for our drive shaft still. So this thing is looking really good. And again, guys, the big deal here was actually getting this mounting surface 17 inches away from the front side of this. That was exactly where we needed to be for this engine to fall in here. We'll get the dowels right into there from the back of the block into the bell housing, and hopefully this thing tightens up and we'll actually lower down a little bit in the car so we don't have any clearance issues up top here. But we are one step closer to getting this thing back on the road. Well, it's about 9 p.m. Sunday night and I'm ready to call it a day, but I will catch up with you guys tomorrow. We'll get this car back on the ground and we'll start throwing the engine in with the hoist. And that's not a borrowed tool. I actually went and bought one of these off of like Facebook Marketplace. So we'll have all the time we need with that to get this engine in there and buttoned up just right. And just like that, it's the next day. I've got the car backed outside and the engine's over here. I pulled the headers off, of course, and I went ahead and put 2 new freeze plugs back here. Once I had that engine stand little bracket removed because they're hard to get at, and then use some RTV in there, press those in, and then I've got the flywheel on, or flex plate rather. All the ARP bolts are fastened up with red Loctite, torqued to 75 pounds. So pretty much at this point in time, I think we're ready to start lowering this in. I went ahead and put a towel there just so I don't mark up my new freshly painted oil pan. I've got my fuel pressure regulator bracket back on here. 3/8 factory line comes in right there. It'll come through and up to the carburetor. Everything else is pretty much routed in. I've got the positive battery cable going down to the starter through these little brackets on the engine mount. I'll be honest with you, I think that the transmission probably isn't high enough to mate the bell housing to the back of the engine block. And one thing I may have to do while we're kind of massaging all this in here is I may have to go in the back and actually lower the transmission down with my floor jack. And that'll kind of bring the front of it up, as you can imagine, like a tilt. But anyways, enough talking. Let's go ahead and see how this goes. All right, guys, we're looking really good. I've just got to push the engine forward about, shoot, an inch right there, and I think we're going to be in here. It's a little stressful doing it by myself, trying not to mark up paint and whatnot. Well, you know when you do something years ago and then you forget and then you try doing it again and then you remember why you did it? I didn't have the valve covers on the first time I put this engine in here, and that was because the clearance was so close to this AC box and the power booster over there for the brakes. And this thing just got away from me and just nicked a little puncture in that box. I'm so upset. But anyways, this thing is in. You can see the mounts there are all sitting where they should be. And miraculously enough, the transmission seems to be mated up correctly. I'll have to get back under the car and see what's going on. But you can see over here as well, All this stuff is right where it should be. So we are looking pretty good. So I spent a few hours trying to fix this box. I went ahead and actually cracked this whole thing loose and put my hand behind there to push this piece forward. And then I went ahead and glued it. I'm gonna paint it a little bit too, just so you can't really see it. Just one of those things that's gonna bother me forever because I'm the one that actually screwed this up. Something always happens when you're trying to do this stuff, and that was a perfect box. It was 50 years old, and of course I'm the one that had to mess it up. But anyways, this thing is coming together nicely, and just a few days I think we'll be able to fire this thing up. Well guys, that's gonna do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. This took place over several different days to get this transmission and the engine back in there. So hopefully within the next few days I can actually get this thing fired up. Once we do that, we have to get a new exhaust system made, or at least the first half of the exhaust system where the collectors pass that transmission mount. So there's a lot of stuff coming to get this thing back where it needs to be roadworthy again. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up for me and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more automotive content like you saw here today. We've got a lot of automotive stuff coming to the channel here. Like this week, we're doing another engine project in the little Ford Cortina we've got going on, so stay tuned for that as well. I look forward to seeing you guys next video.